Scotland, a few spots there for Northern Ireland as well. And the breeze picks up towards the northwest with gales for the Western Isles and for perhaps parts of the Northern Isles as well by the end of the night. With a breeze in the north and the west, it stays frost-free, but for, say, the southeastern third of the country, temperatures dipping close to freezing, or in some rural spots down to -1 or -2 Celsius. So a touch of frost to begin things for parts of England, parts of East Wales, first thing tomorrow. Plenty of sunshine, though. We'll keep the sunny skies for much of England, Wales, bright skies as well for southern and eastern Scotland. But the further northwest you are, the thicker the cloud will be, and that cloud giving a few spots of rain for mainly the higher parts of western Scotland and Northern Ireland. It'll also be breezy towards the northwest, risk of gales at times for the Western Isles, but that breeze coming up from the south, so relatively mild temperatures in the double figures in most places. Then through Saturday night, a band of rain approaches from the northwest. That will push through during Sunday, weaken, and so for many places, Sunday is another fine day.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the briefing. I'm Arlene Foster, and here's what's coming up over this next hour. We will, of course, be covering the latest on the Russian invasion to Ukraine. In the words of our own Prime Minister, we are seeing dark days in the history of our continent. Explosions were heard last night in the capital, Kiev, and Russian troops. We will speak to the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Tom Tugendhat. And the UK will send more armed forces to Estonia earlier than planned to reinforce the NATO ally in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We will be speaking to the DUP Defence spokesperson, Gavin Robinson. So give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 3. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Vladimir Putin's calling on Ukrainian servicemen to take power into their own hands and overthrow their government. That as Russia's defence ministry claims its forces have captured what they're calling a strategic airfield outside Kiev, cutting the capital off from the west. Ukrainian military vehicles are now entering to defend the city. Ukraine's defence ministry claims Russia has lost around 2,800 servicemen in attacks so far, along with 80 Russian tanks, 10 aircraft and 7 helicopters. The Kremlin says it's ready to send a delegation to Belarus for talks with Ukrainian officials. That as overnight residents sheltered underground during missile strikes in Kiev. The UN has warned up to 5 million people could be forced to flee the country. Addressing the NATO summit in Brussels, Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg said Russia has shattered peace on the European continent.
What we have warned against for months has come to pass, despite all our efforts to find a diplomatic solution. Moscow bears sole responsibility for the deliberate, cold-blooded and long-planned invasion. We condemn Russia's aggressions in the strongest possible terms and call on Russia to immediately cease its military action. We stand with the brave people of Ukraine. We fully support Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, its right of self-defense, and its right to choose its own path.
Speaking in the Commons earlier, Armed Forces Minister James Heappey warned NATO against military escalation.
We will explore all that we can do to support the Ukrainians themselves over the next few days, but we must all in this House be clear that British and NATO troops should not, must not play an active role in Ukraine. We must all be clear what the risks of miscalculation could be and how existential that could very quickly become if people miscalculate and things escalate unnecessarily.
Downing Street says Boris Johnson's considering sanctioning Vladimir Putin's inner circle after Ukraine demanded tougher measures and support fending off the Russian invasion. Speaking to GB News earlier, Chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood, said we must stand up to Putin's tyranny.
This is all a wider picture which points to the fact that we've been asleep at the wheel over the last 10 years, that we don't have a Russia strategy. We don't have a way to wean ourselves off our reliance on what Russia provides. And as long as that is the case, it's going to be very difficult to change Russia's behaviour.
The Russian Formula One Grand Prix has been cancelled, the latest sport to react to the invasion of Ukraine. It was due to be held in Sochi on September the 25th. That follows UEFA's confirmation this morning that this season's Champions League final will no longer take place in St. Petersburg. Instead, it's been moved to Paris. The Kremlin has said it regrets the decision by European football's governing body. The showpiece event was set to be played at the Gazprom Arena in St. Petersburg on May the 28th. In other news, a man has pleaded guilty to murdering primary school teacher Sabina Nessa in a park near her home last September. The prosecution have said Kochi Selamaj drove to London from his home in Eastbourne to carry out a premeditated and predatory attack on a stranger. They've also said the 36-year-old garage worker attacked Miss Nessa with extreme violence. 3 former Minneapolis police officers have been convicted of violating 46-year-old George Floyd's civil rights in June 2020. The trio were all charged with failing to provide medical aid when Derek Chauvin held his knee to Mr. Floyd's neck for 9.5 minutes. The 46-year-old's murder by police officer Chauvin sparked racial injustice protests around the world. The UK's COVID-19 vaccine rollout has been praised by a public spending watchdog, despite millions of doses being wasted. A report from the National Audit Office said delivering jabs early helped save lives and reduce serious illness and hospitalisation. Despite confirming 4.7 million vaccines were wasted, the report says the number was much lower than initially expected. It concluded that the operation had been a good use of public money. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now back to the briefing with Arlene Foster.
Welcome back to the programme. Now, there are fears this afternoon that Ukraine's capital, Kiev, could fall in the coming hours or days in the face of a brutal Russian onslaught. Heavy explosions and gunfire have been heard in the capital, and the Kremlin claims to have captured Hostomel airfield, which is northwest of Kiev. The mayor of the city has confirmed that they have gone into a defensive phase. And President Zelensky has made a desperate appeal to Ukraine's armed forces to defend the country as Russia's forces continue with their invasion. Back here in the UK, Number 10 has said that the Prime Minister will be holding a meeting with the leaders of Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic and Slovakia on March the 8th to discuss the situation in Ukraine and our support for security in the region. So the crushing assault continues as Ukraine begs its neighbours for help. Let's get the latest from our own Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, thank you for joining me this afternoon. This has been a very fast-moving invasion. Perhaps you could bring us up to date on what's happening now.
Well, moment by moment, we get new information. There are so many cities across Ukraine that have been under bombardment, too many really to talk about. But we want to show you some images of some of the key incidents that have stuck out. This is a school in eastern Ukraine, and that school, we've seen the pictures from inside that school that shows a number of bodies under blankets. There are casualties. It is, according to local officials there, a missile strike from Russian forces that caused that very extensive damage that you can see to the windows, but also inside the school where these people have died as well. In the capital, Kiev, we're told that the defence forces have now adopted that defensive posture. You can see them there on the roadway. A bit of a photo opportunity, as one of our analysts pointed out last hour, that obviously if the tanks were coming in, they wouldn't be there for very long. But they are very nervous, understandably, in the Ukrainian capital at the moment, because the Russian troops, we're told, are only about 10 to 15 kilometres north of the capital, trying to push their way. They're already in the northern suburbs of the capital, trying to push their way south towards the city centre, it appears. They've also taken over an airport near Kiev itself. This was the scene of some fierce fighting yesterday, but the Russian military say they now have control of that airfield. If that is true, that means that they will be able to move troops into that area around the capital in much greater forces and much quicker, speedier time. We also want to show you some images from the capital of some residential areas that were again struck as missiles came in. Again, the local officials here in the capital, Kiev, say that that was due to Russian missile strikes. Now, the Russian military have denied that they have been targeting civilian areas. That's their word, but obviously you can see yourself the damage to these buildings here. Very extensive. We're told that there are significant casualties amongst the civilian population, even in the capital there. Now, the Ukrainian military say they are having some successes in being able to try to fight back. There are some images now of aircraft wreckage on the ground. Again, this is in Kiev, and according to Ukrainian military sources, this is a Russian, or the remnants of a Russian aircraft that was downed by Ukrainian forces using, we understand, these shoulder-launched missiles, many of them of which they've got from, of course, the UK in recent months, sent thousands of missiles and launchers to Ukraine, and 100 British troops were in Ukraine helping train the Ukrainian military in their use. The Ukrainian government have said these weapons have proved highly effective. They've asked for more, and the UK Defence Minister James Heappey said earlier today that there would be more of these weapons heading out there, but he wouldn't give details about how they will get into the country. In the meantime, the British forces, although they won't be on the ground in Ukraine, the 100 personnel who are on the ground have now been pulled out of Ukraine. They are going to neighbouring countries. This is Estonia, of course, a NATO ally, and there are already 1,000 British personnel in this country, Arlene, and that number is being doubled now to 2 brigades and a command headquarters. So 2,000 British troops roughly in Estonia. There are others in other Baltic countries, including Poland, and understandably, they won't just be there to help reassure their NATO allies in that region, but they may well be called upon to help out with what seems to be a growing humanitarian crisis. There are images now of refugees in Poland. You can see them there at a number. There are 6, we're told, so far, refugee centres that have been set up along the Polish border with Ukraine. People have been spilling across that border. This morning it was put at 28,000, so I can only imagine that it's grown probably quite significantly since then, because the numbers fleeing the fighting in Ukraine, Arlene, is only going to grow as the battle in that country intensifies.
So, Mark, we've talked about the movement of people on many occasions, usually in the context of coming from France into England. There will be a large-scale movement of people out of Ukraine, won't there? And you've already mentioned a humanitarian crisis. So those friendly neighbours of Ukraine will be preparing for that at present, I'm assuming.
Yes, in the first instance, Arlene, those countries around Ukraine, to the western side of Ukraine, of course, they can't go to the east to be in Russia. So they don't have many options to the south there at the Black Sea there. So their only option is really to head into those Baltic nations, those NATO allies, in the hope that they can seek refuge there. And they will, of course, be welcomed and helped. There are, as I say, reception centres in Poland. Romania as well has received thousands of refugees already now. This morning again, and as I say, numbers are updating all the time. You can see many of the vehicles heading out of Ukraine and out of towns and cities in Ukraine, heading towards the borders of their neighbouring countries. We're told 100,000 as of this morning had fled the most intense fighting. Now, because that conflict is spreading to lots of cities across Ukraine, then lots of people are going to be heading to the borders, and it is a country of well over 40 million people. The difference between, of course, this refugee crisis and people that are arriving, say, in Calais, for instance, is that they can see right away people spilling over the border from this conflict zone are genuine refugees trying to get in to their area. And it may well be that Britain and other European countries are asked to help out here, depending on what number actually leave Ukraine, to offer some kind of assistance. I'm sure that the Home Secretary will be monitoring that situation with a view to doing what she can to help.
Mark, thank you very much for that update, which included some very sobering footage. And we're now going to speak with Keir Giles. Keir is a Russian expert at Chatham House. And I suppose, Keir, I want to start with the scale and the scope of the attack on the Ukraine, because I think a lot of us, myself included, understood that there was tension in the east of Ukraine. But we've seen attacks on Odessa in the south and, of course, around the capital as well. What do we read into the significance of the scale and the scope of the invasion?
Well, first of all, it is the full-scale assault that American and British intelligence releases were predicting. They have been proved entirely correct. It also shows that the Russian descriptions of what is happening are completely unreliable, as you would also expect, because they're still talking about an operation in those eastern provinces instead of a full-blown assault on the whole of the country. Now, whether that disinformation is for domestic consumption within Russia, or whether it's supposed to convince anybody outside the country as well, it's just another indication that there is absolutely no point in listening to the Russian version of what is happening.
Yes, and we understand that the Russian version is very much talking about that special military operation as opposed to a full-scale invasion. But yet there does seem to be some resistance to what people are being told in Russia. We've seen not widespread protests, but quite significant protests to what's happening in the Ukraine. Did that surprise you?
It does, a little, and it is a very brave person who's coming out to protest against Russian government decisions now, because let's not forget that at the same time as stepping up its external assertiveness against Europe, Russia's also been clamping down domestically. President Putin's moved from controlling the domestic opposition to trying to eliminate it altogether, and dealing very harshly with people who come out on the streets to protest. But you've seen not just ordinary people who are shocked and dismayed at what Russia is doing to Ukraine, but also some quite prominent figures, some leading journalists, some leading academics and scientists, all of whom are signing open letters making clear their opposition to the war and beginning to suffer the consequences.
And I thought it was interesting. I was reading about some media figures coming out and saying they couldn't be a part of what was going on, and some people in the acting fraternity as well, which I thought was incredibly brave, and you've already made that point. I suppose as well, Ciara, I'm interested to know what you think is behind. I mean, what is Putin's grand plan in all of this? Because I think our viewers and our listeners on radio would be interested to hear what you had to say about that.
Well, it's convenient, of course, that Putin has laid out his grand plan in both his rambling, long Monday night speech and also the long articles that he's written about how he sees Russia's role in Europe and the world before now. And it's a very disturbing plan, because Ukraine might be the current focus of his attentions, but he's actually complaining about what he calls catastrophic decisions that were made 100 years ago when the Russian Empire fell apart. And that's bad news for any countries that used to be part of that Russian Empire, including countries that we think of as now nothing to do with Russia, like Finland, like Poland, like the Baltic states. So there's nothing to say at the moment that President Putin's ambition stops at Ukraine.
And I was, you're absolutely right about that, because I only learnt that Finland is not a member of NATO. So where does that leave Finland? Because they might be exposed, because when you think of some of the other neighbours, of course, they are members of NATO, but Finland is not.
Well, it's a long-running debate within Finland that has been fairly finely balanced now for several decades, because in broad terms, not much had changed for Finland since that last wave of NATO enlargement when the Baltic states joined, because it was always going to be the worst possible moment and the best possible moment to join, not to provoke Russia into doing something rash by joining the defensive alliance, but also not leaving it too late and leaving themselves open to Russian pressure. When they talk about it in Finland, they talk about getting fire assurance in advance or when your house is actually burning. It's a very heated debate, and of course it's only got more heated over the last few days.
Well, I can imagine it's a debate that will continue in Finland, especially now we see what's happening in the Ukraine. Ciara, thank you so much for joining us. It's very interesting to speak with you this afternoon. And after the break, we will be speaking to Tom Tugendhat, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. That's in a couple of minutes.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties.
But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it. Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and every weekday we bring you The Briefing live from 9:30 a.m. The stories, analysis, and live debate that you need to hear.
Quite right, Tom, of course.
Was this something that had been considered at all?
Difficult to answer.
Gas-guzzling helicopters circling. Noise is being made here. Joe Biden walking out. Thank you very much for joining us. Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, Monday to Friday, 9:30 a.m. on GB News.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties.
But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it, Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
And welcome back to The Briefing. It's 15:23. A public inquiry into the death of Dawn Sturgis, the woman killed in the 2018 Salisbury Novichok poisonings, is to begin imminently. Ms. Sturgis died in July 2018 after being accidentally exposed to Novichok, left behind by the attempted poisoning of double agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. The role the Russian state played in the death of Ms. Sturgis is to be investigated in detail at her inquest. Well, this morning, a pre-inquest review hearing has just been heard at the Royal Courts of Justice in London, and our South East reporter Ellie Costello sent us this package.
But today was a hearing ahead of that public inquiry into the circumstances surrounding Dawn Sturgis's death. And in the courtroom was Mr. Manfield. He was speaking remotely, but he is the lawyer that is representing the Sturgis family. And he reflected on the poignancy of the timing of this hearing. We saw the Russian invasion of Ukraine yesterday, and he made an appeal for urgency. He said he didn't want to lose a single day in this public inquiry. And there is no doubt that Russia's involvement is going to be a huge factor in this public inquiry. These are serious allegations that Dawn Sturgis was killed as an indirect result of Kremlin-sponsored poisoning. So who exactly is responsible? Well, Anatoly Chepega and Alexander Mishkin are the names. They are long been alleged to have smeared the Novichok on the door handle of Mr. Skripal's front door. Now, they travelled to Salisbury, you may remember, for 2 days under fake names and passports from Moscow. Now, it is believed that they are part of a group that belong to a team from the GRU, which is Russia's military intelligence service. And the man allegedly who's in charge on the ground is called Denis Sergeyev, and he is linked to many covert activities across Europe. Now, all three of these men have been named, but they can't be formally charged because they haven't yet been arrested, and they are believed to be in Russia.
So thank you for that update on that very important inquest. And now we're going over to Mark White, who has a new update for us.
Yeah, some lines coming out really from the Russian President Vladimir Putin. This is as much, of course, an information war as it is actually a battle on the ground. And he has been calling actually on the Ukrainian military to rise up and overthrow their own government. So that is the latest line from him. So it's clear that this is not, from what we're hearing from his own lips, just an operation to try to stabilize, as he was claiming, these areas around Donetsk and Luhansk in eastern Ukraine. He wants to see the toppling of the Ukrainian government. I mean, it's quite clear, I think, Arlene, from what we've been seeing in the last 2 days with the targeting, not just of the areas around Luhansk and Donetsk. I mean, it's gone way beyond that now, all around Ukraine, key cities, infrastructure, hundreds of different sites that have been targeted in this massive and sustained invasion by the Russian military. But he's not getting it all his own way from all of the reports that are coming out, suggesting some real fierce fighting from the Ukrainian military. And that may be prompting him to call on the Ukrainian military actually to overthrow their own government and, as he would say, bring an end to the fighting. But we're also getting lines out, the Ukrainian military now confirmed, claiming that they have inflicted 2,800 casualties, 2,800 deaths from the Russian military side. So they claim they have killed 2,800 Russian military personnel. Not confirmed, so we always have to put that caveat in there and treat it with some caution in this information war. But this is what the Ukrainian military say they have done, that they have killed 2,800 military personnel from Russia. The Russians, on the other hand, of course, have said that they have inflicted severe casualties and inflicted very significant damage on critical infrastructure throughout Ukraine. This morning, some 200 attacks on critical infrastructure sites across Ukraine. It will be much more than that now. So with every hour, as I say, Arlene, in fact, it's not even every hour, it's moment by moment. There are new lines that come out in what is a really worrying and terrifying conflict that is really erupting there in this democratic country on the fringes of Eastern Europe.
You and I were talking about this before we came on air, that this is really the first social media war insofar as it's an invasion, and each side are trying to get out their lines through all of the platforms that they can. And in a way, that helps because we're getting information out in a way that we didn't, and maybe some in the past may have taken the lines from Putin and the Russian authorities. But now we're having this social media war, and that changes it slightly, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it is a huge sort of propaganda tool that all of the sides are using. I mean, even Western Western governments have been using social media as well, and the media in general, to get their message out, their warnings to Vladimir Putin not to invade. He'd said that he had no intention of invading Ukraine. Well, of course, look at the situation on the ground now in Ukraine. And as you say, social media is there pumping out not just lines from people in terms of what areas are being hit, potential casualties, but pictures as well, and some of them really quite harrowing and difficult to view. We, other media outlets as well, are being very careful in what we show. We're trying to bottom out all of the pictures that we see and getting them verified from reputable news organizations as well. Reuters pictures have been great in terms of trying to, get those images verified before putting them out. So as tempting as it is, of course, to lift these images from social media, I think it is important, given what's happening there, to try just to bring those images that we can confirm are genuine images of the conflict that is erupting across Ukraine as we speak.
OK, Mark, thank you so much for bringing us up to date again. And after the break, I will be joined by Gavin Robinson, who's a DUP MP, member of the Defence Committee and spokesperson for the DUP on that committee. But first, here are the news headlines with Rhiannon.
It's 3:31. Here are your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Kremlin says President Putin has proposed to hold talks with Ukraine in Minsk. That as Russia's defense ministry claims to have captured a strategic airfield outside Kiev, cutting the capital off from the west. There are reports of loud blasts coming from the eastern city of Kharkiv. Ukraine's defense ministry claims 2,800 Russian servicemen have died so far in the conflict. Putin's calling on Ukrainian servicemen to take power into their own hands and overthrow their government.
I once again appeal to the military personnel of the armed forces of Ukraine. Do not allow neo-Nazis and Ukrainian radical nationalists to use your children, wives and elders as human shields. Take power into your own hands. It will be easier for us to reach agreement.
Well, addressing the NATO summit in Brussels earlier, Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg said Russia has shattered peace on the European continent.
We condemn Russia's aggressions in the strongest possible terms and call on Russia to immediately cease its military action. We stand with the brave people of Ukraine. We fully support Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, its right of self-defense and its right to choose its own path.
The Russian Formula One Grand Prix has been cancelled, the latest sport to react to the invasion of Ukraine. It was due to be held in Sochi on September the 25th. It follows UEFA's confirmation this morning that this season's Champions League final on May the 28th will no longer take place in St. Petersburg. It's instead being moved to Paris. The Kremlin has said it regrets the decision by European football's governing body. A man has pleaded guilty to murdering primary school teacher Sabina Nessa in a park near her home last September. The prosecution have said Punchy drove to London from his home in Eastbourne to carry out a premeditated and predatory attack on a stranger. They've also said the 36-year-old garage worker attacked Miss Nessa with extreme violence. The UK's COVID-19 vaccine rollout has been praised by a public spending watchdog despite millions of doses being wasted. A report from the National Audit Office said delivering jabs early helped save lives and reduce serious illness and hospitalisation. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. A full update at the top of the hour. It's back to the briefing with Arlene Foster in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the briefing. The Prime Minister will be attending a NATO meeting today with other leaders of the Western Alliance as Russia pushes its brutal assault further into Ukraine. The UK will send further armed forces to Estonia earlier than planned to reinforce its NATO ally amid fears of further Russian aggression. 1,000 UK troops are on standby to support refugees' response as well. But earlier, in the House of Commons, the Defence Minister, James Halfpenny, urged some restraint in the Western response.
Mr. Speaker, as you've heard from the Secretary of State, the Prime Minister and others over recent days, we will explore all that we can do to support the Ukrainians themselves over the next few days. But we must all in this House be clear that British and NATO troops should not, must not play an active role in Ukraine. We must all be clear what the risks of miscalculation could be and how existential that could very quickly become if people miscalculate and things escalate unnecessarily.
So joining me now is Gavin Robinson. He's the DUP Defence spokesperson and member of the House of Commons Defence Committee. Gavin, I want to talk to you about James Halfpenny in a little minute, but first of all, let's talk about what was happening over this past couple of weeks, because there was a lot of geopolitical game playing going on, and we were told very categorically by some people that he wasn't going to invade into the Ukraine, and if he did, it would only be in the eastern region of Ukraine. That was wrong, and I have to say our own intelligence sources seem to have got it right on this occasion. As a Defence Committee member, you were hearing the same sort of advice. So do you think it was right that we informed the public that we felt that he was going to invade and have an invasion on the scale that he has now engaged in?
Yes, I mean, you're absolutely right. Going back to the start of January, where you started to see troop movements and troops gathering, the Russian position was that this is all about prearranged exercises. There's nothing to see here, and there's no malintent. And yet the suspicion grew, and in early January, you heard people saying, look, now's too soon, they can't move because the ground's not hard enough and it's not cold enough to move tanks of that nature. But the middle of February is probably about the right time. And you also heard, and bear in mind that Vladimir Putin is probably the only world leader who is close to Xi Jinping and was one of the only world leaders to attend the Winter Olympics, that Vladimir Putin would not do anything until the conclusion of the Winter Olympics. And so the discord came then between President Biden indicating that he thought movement would take place on the 16th of February and others saying, no, the Winter Olympics doesn't conclude until the following Sunday. So just watch this space after that. And sadly, it has come to pass. Now, I think it's still clear that nobody knows the true intent of what it is that Vladimir Putin is attempting to achieve. Not the full wholesale occupation of Ukraine, but as your correspondent mentioned earlier, regime change, the installation of somebody more supportive and leans more toward Russia than the West, or the key reassignment of areas like Mariupol port, which sits to the western side of the Luhansk region. That seems to be where it's at the moment. But given the level of intensity and the swift way in which their troops have moved over the last number of days, it's hard to see what the end game for Vladimir Putin is.
Yeah, and I mean, when we listened to some of the language on Monday evening about denazification of Ukraine, that was to all of us very offensive, but it must have been incredibly offensive to the president, who, of course, is from a Jewish background himself. To hear that that was the sort of language coming out of Moscow. And I'm wondering, Gavin, should we also look back at what happened last year towards the end of August with Afghanistan? Do you think that what we're seeing now in Ukraine is a consequence of what happened in Afghanistan and the manner in which the Allied troops left Afghanistan?
So they withdrew, we all withdrew very quickly. Once America decided that it no longer had a presence in Afghanistan, there was little else to remain. And bear in mind also, China was able to move forward with their plans in Hong Kong without any significant resistance. And yet in Hong Kong's case, there had been, as you know, this joint relationship for 50 years. We were 25 years through it, but that was to be jointly controlled with China and the United Kingdom. No consequence for the egregious actions in Hong Kong. No consequence when the world withdraws from Afghanistan, and no consequence for Vladimir Putin either in 2008 when he went into Georgia, or 2014 when he annexed Crimea, and no seeming consequence aside from cancellation of Russia holding G8 and then subsequent G8 invitations from 2014. There has been very little else. Now, as a country, we're only starting, as you know, to get a grip on the appropriate financial sanctions. It was only 2 years ago that Parliament changed the goalpost to say, no, we can sanction not just countries, but groups and individuals. But you'll remember even on Tuesday, when the Prime Minister outlined some of the sanctions that were going to take place, there was muted frustration within the House of Commons about how limited they were, how short they went, and how, for someone like Vladimir Putin, he will have factored in the economic consequence. If our resistance or if our support for Ukraine can solely be defined as banks, not tanks, it really doesn't offer a lot of hope to the poor Ukrainian people. We really do have the jackboot on their neck at this time.
And there's so many questions I want to ask you out of that response. First of all, how do you think China will be watching all of this in the context of Taiwan, for example? And also, you mentioned there the sanctions regime, and of course, we heard from President Biden that he would have liked to have dealt with the monetary transfer system. It's called SWIFT. But unfortunately, there were some people in Europe, and by that he means the European Union, mainly Germany and Italy, from what I can see, who objected to that. Now, if we're going to impose sanctions, surely that's the first place that we should be hitting these people at.
Correct. So the SWIFT process allows verification for the transfer of money. So it gives unique and safe codes and allows secure international transfers for significant amounts of money, and Russia is part of that system. America wanted to proceed. Our country, our Prime Minister wanted to proceed, but it is the European Union that appear to be the stumbling block within the now G7 group of countries. And even if you go earlier in this week, it was President Biden that put sanctions on the Nord Stream pipeline, the gas pipeline from Russia. He put sanctions on the company. He only did that when the German Chancellor decided to take the decision that they weren't going to proceed with, or they would shelve their plans to buy their gas from Russia. Up until that point, US wouldn't act because Germany was too reliant on the gas that Russia was supplying. So there's a whole host of significant steps that I think can be taken, should be taken. And I think for too long, particularly in our own country, there has been this desire, unspoken desire in Whitehall to make sure that no matter what the morality of it, London is a safe haven for dirty money. And from a Northern Ireland perspective, for years we've been seeking to get compensation for the victims of Libyan-sponsored IRA terrorism. Money is held in London. Interest is accrued on that money. Tax is taken by our government from that money, and yet they won't make it available to the victims from our own country who suffered egregiously in our own country. And why? Because they don't want to disrupt this view that London is a safe haven for dirty money right throughout the world.
Well, maybe this is an opportunity to raise that very issue again, which of course is of huge significance to the innocent victims in Northern Ireland that suffered as a result of Gaddafi-sponsored terrorism. I do want to ask you about James Halfpenny's comments at the very start of this clip, Gavin, because he very clearly was indicating there that we wouldn't be putting military into the Ukraine to support the Ukrainian people and their army. So to date, we've been dealing with this diplomatically, politically. We're now seeing some economic and financial sanctions, although, of course, we would like to see more financial sanctions in relation to the SWIFT monetary system. Do you think militarily that we are going to get involved in this full-scale invasion, and that's what it is, into the Ukraine? Oh dear, have we lost Gavin? Did you get that question, Gavin?
I have heard your question, Arlene. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Go ahead, Gavin. Thank you.
Yeah, I remember raising 3 weeks ago with the Defence Secretary that this view that because Ukraine wasn't in NATO, we could not act, presented an incredible vulnerability for the Ukrainian people. And I find it very frustrating when at the same time we say we have no active or participative role in Ukraine, we have people in the House of Commons who think we should be actively involved in the Pacific Ocean and actively involved in the South China Sea, where NATO doesn't have a role at all. This is on our doorstep. This very much impacts us. It seems to be lost on people that Ukraine exports to the world half of all of our sunflower oil, 20% of all of our rapeseed oil, and 19, 14 and 12% of our corn, barley and wheat. Not just ours, the world's. Ukraine is an important country. It is sitting on the doorstep of Europe. It is a fledgling democracy, but it is a democracy nonetheless for which there is huge hope, and it is being suppressed by a dictator. And that is something that I think principally we should take a more active role in.
Well, I must say, Gavin, I was surprised at those comments from James Halfpenny because I think tactically it's wrong to advertise that we're not going to enter into the Ukrainian conflict in the way that he has. And I think obviously that sends messages to the Russians as well. But thank you, Gavin, for joining me. It's been a really good discussion this afternoon. So NATO leaders, including Boris Johnson and President Joe Biden, are meeting to discuss the situation in the Ukraine as part of the efforts to reassure members of NATO's eastern flanks. The Alliance's Secretary-General, Jens Stoltenberg, has pledged to defend every ally against any attack on every inch of NATO territory. This morning, Britain's Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, spoke to GBNews. Let's have a look.
We will respond to this as NATO, 30 countries, a massive alliance. And therefore, if we are required to send troops, to stand up troops in readiness, deploy them to other parts of the world or other parts of Europe, we will do that. And that's why we've already seen in some cases more troops going to Estonia. We've doubled it from a battle group to 2 battle groups and a brigade headquarters. That's nearly 2,000 troops. Last night, our RAF jets did the first policing of the airspace in Romania and in Poland. Ukraine is not in NATO, so it doesn't get the benefit of the mutual self-defence of 30 countries, ranging from Turkey to Portugal to Norway, all able to come to each other's defence. But we can do the next best thing, which is provide them with lethal aid and non-lethal aid, which Britain has, again, been the first at Europe to do so, alongside countries elsewhere. And so we can do that, and that's what we're doing right now. But, fundamentally, President Putin is not thinking rationally. He's got overwhelming forces on the border of Ukraine, well, now in Ukraine, thousands and thousands of troops, 65% of his whole combat forces surrounding and invading one country. That is a real challenge. We'll do everything we can to help them. But, Putin seems set on a course of action that will forever isolate him and lead to huge suffering. But there is some ray of light and hope for the Ukrainians. Russia failed to get its objectives in the first 24 hours. It had planned a number of cities. It had failed to do that. It lost over 450 personnel of the army. It lost fighter jets and aircraft and helicopters and armoured vehicles. And the world has seen Putin for what he is. And that will, give him a legacy he doesn't want.
And that was the Defence Secretary. We had hoped to speak to Tom Tugendhat, who's the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Unfortunately, Tom hasn't been able to join us, and we understand that given the absolute enormity of what's going on at present. And we hope to speak to Tom certainly in the very near future again. But let's now speak to Shelley Stevens. Shelley is a British expat living in Ukraine. He's in Kremenchuk, I hope I've said that right, Shelley, which is in central Ukraine. You're very, very welcome to the programme, Shelley. Perhaps you could tell us the mood where you are at this present moment in time.
Well, I'm living with the wife and her daughter, who's 39, and they've got all the girls, there's about 7 of them, living here, crying and frightened. We normally live in a separate place called a dacha, like a country house. But they've asked me to come and stay with them because they're so frightened. With the sirens going off, it's really quite bad. And an orphanage in Vorzul, 15 kilometres from Kiev, with 50 kids in it, was hit by the Russians. It's quite frightening for everybody here.
And Shelley, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon to give us your briefing right from the heart of Ukraine. What is it that you want to see Western countries doing to help Ukraine? People are talking about standing in solidarity and we'll support Ukraine, but really, what is it you want to see happening?
Well, first of all, I have to say this is not a fascist state. I've come to retire here, and I love the people, I love the country. But for me, they should be much more severe with the sanctions, such as the visas. They shouldn't be given visas. The SWIFT agreement should be stopped, irrespective of the problems. Yesterday, I was talking to, earlier today, a grandmother who is widowed, was with her beautiful little girl, 12 months old, 12 months in a bomb shelter. I can't imagine what people in England would think if they had to go into a bomb shelter with a 12-month-old granddaughter.
Yeah, it's very difficult to listen to you talking about that, and we've seen some really horrific footage of some of the attacks that had taken place. Where you are, Shelley, what's happening there at present? Is it quiet at the moment, or is there a sense of foreboding?
It's actually gone quiet here because what has happened is the Russian forces are aiming for Ukraine. They're trying to topple Kiev. They're trying to topple the government, but then they bypassed this small town of Kremenchuk. It's about the same size as Luton.
Okay, and did you think it was inevitable that Russia was going to invade, or were you of the opinion that it would probably be in the eastern provinces but not really affecting the centre of Ukraine, and certainly not Kiev?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I guessed would happen. But people here are frightened, and like I said, the girls here are really crying because they're frightened of their troops getting killed by the Russians. They're frightened of what's going to happen here. It's awful. I mean, I come from England, a peaceful country, and this is just the same, a peaceful country. And I, making my life here, whatever happens, I love this country, and I don't see why they should be frightened of Putin. If he wants to send a nuclear bomb, then surely we can say we're going to send a nuclear bomb. So for me, it's awful.
And are you going to stay where you are, Shelley? I mean, is it your plan to remain in Kremenchuk?
Yes.
Yes, and your family as well?
Yes, they are Ukrainian, and I love the people. I've worked with many Ukrainians in England, and I've been coming here for about 3 years. I've lived here for four months. I'm 74 years of age, and this is absolutely an incredible experience of somebody of my age to witness what's happening.
Well, Shelley...
And I also want to just say, I was talking to another friend of mine in St. Petersburg, and she said all thinking people in Russia are opposing this. So surely it's up to these Russian generals to turn back on Putin. That's my belief.
Well, Shelley, we're sending you all good wishes from here in the UK, and no doubt we'll be speaking to you again. And thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.
No problem. Thank you for your time. Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
You've been watching The Briefing, which has been dominated, of course, by what's happening in the Ukraine. I'm Arlene Foster, and the show is back every Friday from 3 p.m. Up next, it's Nana Akur.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGibbon. It's turned into quite the afternoon for many places. Dry for most, blue skies, and with light winds, much more pleasant out there compared to recent days and weeks. The reason? An area of high pressure just bumping up against the UK from the southwest, and less tightly packed isobars hence the lighter winds. But something is approaching western Scotland, and that'll give extra cloud overnight, along with some outbreaks of mainly light rain and mainly for western hills. 1 or 2 spots of rain possible for Northern Ireland as well. And the breeze picks up overnight, especially towards the northwest, with the risk of gales for the Western Isles. With the cloud and the wind overnight, 5 to 7 Celsius for Scotland and Northern Ireland. But towards the southeast, 0, 1 Celsius as we start off Saturday. Clear skies and light winds here, so a touch of frost for parts of central and southeast England, maybe parts of Wales as well. And really, we keep the sunshine from the word go across much of England, East Wales, perhaps some brighter spells as well for eastern Scotland. It will be a breezier day compared to today, but that breeze coming up from the south, and so 10 to 12 Celsius in the south, 8 or 9 in the north. And for Scotland, for Northern Ireland,